It's pretty crazy we're already here, but the NBA trade deadline is next week. And with how things are shaping up across the league, things could get interesting. I think what might make this deadline so unique is just how many teams on paper should be extremely active, both as sellers and buyers. The sellers are relatively clear, and I think easily the most talked about possible seller leading up to this deadline is the Toronto Raptors. Raptors fans are some of the most opinionated in the entire league, and while it's a hard pill to swallow, big changes are coming to Toronto. A year ago, I didn't think they would be in this situation, but despite building a super solid core with guys like Siakam, OG Anunoby, and Fred VanVleet, then drafting last year's Rookie of the Year Scotty Barnes, this team currently sits out of the play-in picture in the Eastern Conference with a record of 23-28. Probably the most concerning part of this record is that every single member of this core has played at least 40 games. Injuries are just not the storyline here. Now, their struggles are one thing, but it's really their contract situation that's going to force their hand leading up to this deadline. Their 28-year-old star Pascal Siakam is set to hit the open market next offseason. Fred VanVleet has a player option for next year. Gary Trent has a player option for next year. OG Anunoby is going to hit free agency with Siakam. Now, obviously, them just becoming free agents doesn't necessarily mean they're going anywhere. But with all these guys set to get new deals, the Raptors either look to the trade market or they dish out a bunch of new deals to keep a core together that right now sits as the 12th seed in the East. I think as we approach this deadline, there's a few routes we could see them go. The first option is they just do absolutely nothing. I think this happens if their demands for Anunoby or even Siakam are just way too high, and they decide to be patient with Fred VanVleet and Gary Trent, given the sign and trade possibilities that could come up this offseason. The next more exciting one is I think we could see them trade Anunoby, something that I think would really set the stage for what's to come in Toronto. Anunoby is definitely the most talked about Raptor when it comes to this deadline, and it makes sense. Right now, he's at the right spot in his career, both in terms of his contract and his age, that the Raptors could get a pretty big haul. Teams like the Thunder and Hawks have come up a lot, and it's easy to see why. The last option, which we can't rule out, is that they blow it up. By that, we really mean both Siakam and Anunoby get traded. I don't hate this route. It gives them a clear path and identity going into the offseason, and I think given the pressure some teams like the Phoenix Suns, for example, have to compete right now, the possible hauls might be hard to pass on. We never know what a team is going to do, but I can guarantee Ujiri and the rest of this Raptors front office is probably on the phone as we speak. Then there's the Chicago Bulls, who have been quite the roller coaster of emotions lately. This is a team that just over a season ago, the fan base was screaming to put a competent roster around Zach LaVine, and man, did this front office get to work. They made a massive trade for Nikola Vucevic, then the following offseason had a crazy free agency haul, bringing in DeMar DeRozan, Lonzo Ball, and Alex Caruso. At the start of last season, they looked incredible. Lonzo was playing lights out. DeMar DeRozan looked like he went back in time, and the team had one of the best records in the league. Since then, though, things have gone a little bit downhill, which has to make seeing the success of guys like Lauri Markkanen, Wendell Carter, and Franz Wagner tough for Bulls fans. The downward trajectory really started with the injury to Lonzo Ball, an injury he's still reportedly nowhere near returning from. A scary sight considering he has a $21 million player option in 2025. So here's the situation they're looking at leading up to the deadline. Right now, they're a fringe play-in team at 23-26. Their big three of LaVine, DeRozan, and Vucevic have been solid offensively, but the reality of their upside together is starting to set in, and like the Raptors, their contracts are forcing their hand. Vucevic's deal expires after this season. Keep in mind, he's also 32 years old. DeMar DeRozan, who's 33, has one more year left on his deal. There's just flat out not much hope for this group, but there does seem to be something in the way of the Bulls having the deadline they probably should have, and that's themselves. It came out recently that the Bulls have set the price tag of Alex Caruso at 2 first-round picks. Now, I love Caruso. He's on a super team-friendly deal, and he's an incredible role player given his ability to affect the game all over the court. But 2 first-round picks seems a little ridiculous. I can't even imagine what they'd be looking for in a DeMar DeRozan trade, but as we all know, things can change quickly with the trade deadline clock ticking. Now, the Bulls are a team I could see just trying to play this out, but keep your guys' eyes on guys like Kobe White, Alex Caruso, and maybe even DeMar DeRozan or Nikola Vucevic. Today's video is sponsored by Southern New Hampshire University. What makes SNHU such an interesting option to get your degree really no matter where you are in life is their online programs with some of the lowest tuition rates in the nation. Their online programs are taken extremely seriously. You're given a dedicated academic and career advisor. Their instructors come with real-world expertise in their fields, and SNHU has world-class student services, specifically with the busy adult life in mind, such as an online bookstore, library, and 24/7 tutoring support. They have degree options in tons of different fields, but the degree I really want to highlight, as an avid gamer myself, is their bachelor's in game programming and development. Before going full-time in YouTube, this is a path I was seriously considering. This program will teach you things such as languages like C++ and Java, 3D modeling and texturing, the ability to use Unreal Engine. And if you go to the link in the description, you can actually check out the current average annual salary for a game developer, which just might get you more interested. That same link will give you all the information you need to get started. Thank you, Southern New Hampshire University, for sponsoring today's video. Then there's the Hornets. After the situation this offseason with Miles Bridges and then the injuries LaMelo's had to deal with so far, they haven't had quite the year they expected. They currently sit with a record of 15-36. For context, that's the 4th worst record in the league. This has created a relatively clear goal for the rest of the year, and that's Victor Wembanyama. This has also made them one of the more interesting teams going into this deadline, with just how many guys they have that could really bring a lot to teams across the league. There's Terry Rozier, but given the sheer size of his contract and how he's played this season, I don't really think he's going anywhere. Gordon Hayward's interesting, as practically any team that wants him can have him, with the Hornets most likely looking to escape the $32 million they owe him next season. The 4 guys, though, that I think are really interesting to pay attention to are the ones all hitting free agency in some capacity this offseason. That being Kelly Oubre, Mason Plumlee, Jalen McDaniels, and PJ Washington. Kind of out of nowhere, Mason Plumlee is having the best season of his career, averaging 12 points and 10 rebounds. He's a really interesting option for teams looking for big depth going into the playoffs. A team like the Celtics really comes to mind as a possible landing spot. Kelly Oubre is another guy, putting up the best box score numbers of his career, averaging 20 points a game. Now, it isn't very efficient, but he can bring a lot to a team that just needs some shot creation. Hitting free agency this offseason, I think he's a great risk to reward option at the deadline. Now, McDaniels and Washington are a little harder, as are most restricted free agents, to price in a trade. Not only are you getting them for this season, but you're also paying for the right to match their free agency offers. PJ Washington is not going to go for cheap. He's averaging 15 points on decent efficiency this season. For McDaniels, there seems to be a ton of interest given his Swiss Army knife ability. He's averaging 11 points and 5 rebounds so far. Oubre and Plumlee are clearly the most obvious to go, but I think it's safe to say for the Hornets, LaMelo Ball is probably the only untouchable player on this roster leading up to next Thursday. Those are the 3 teams that really scream seller right now, but there's definitely other teams I think, or at least should, have the same mentality next week, one of those being the Wizards. Now, the Wizards already made a move, sending Rui to the Lakers, but that shouldn't be the last of it. So far this season, it's been just as disappointing as we all expected, which you would think would have them extremely active in the trade market, with Porzingis, Will Barton, and Kyle Kuzma all poised to be free agents. Now, I said you would think, but we all know what the Wizards are actually going to do. Absolutely nothing. Then dish out overpays across this roster with the pressure to try to make something of this Bradley Beal era. Then there's the Utah Jazz. All the Jazz fans got really mad at me suggesting blowing it up at the deadline, even if that meant a Lauri Markkanen trade. I'm aware I've got relatively polar opinions when it comes to situations like this, but I think we can at least all agree they should be active at this trade deadline, trying to move guys like Malik Beasley, Jordan Clarkson, and Kelly Olynyk. Those are the teams. Now let's look at some players we could possibly see on the move. I think just about every contender in the league should be at least calling the Pistons regarding Bojan Bogdanovic. This season, he's been absolutely lights out, averaging 21 points, shooting 49% from the field and 42% from 3. Now, despite the success, the Pistons are still one of the worst teams in the league, so I can see not really being in a rush to move him, but if they're willing, I think the price could be relatively intriguing to contenders considering his age and the size of this deal. Then there's John Collins, which is a tough situation to predict. The Hawks haven't had nearly the season they expected after making the blockbuster trade for DeJounte Murray. I'm sure they're going to be looking to salvage this season at the deadline, and Collins is the obvious option to move. I'm just not sure what the market is for a guy that's putting up 13 points with no defense and potentially 3 years left on his deal, getting $25 million a season. Another team that's failing to reach expectations after a blockbuster offseason trade is the Minnesota Timberwolves. Given their struggles and the fact that their point guard D'Angelo Russell is hitting the open market this offseason, it's definitely not out of the cards he's on the move. He's a polar player, but I don't think the Timberwolves would have to look too far for a win-win trade with Russell putting up a super efficient 18 points a game this season. Now, these are the bigger names that we're keeping our eye on and are worth our time to project, but we can never rule out a blockbuster trade that just comes out of nowhere, like we saw with DeMarcus Cousins to the Pelicans back in 2017. I'm getting the feeling we're either going to be extremely let down or it's going to be an avalanche. We're either going to get a deadline headlined by a Mason Plumlee trade or a deadline headlined by Pascal Siakam going to the Suns, causing an avalanche of chaos across the league. But I really want to know your guys' thoughts. There was a bunch more players, a bunch more teams we could have mentioned, but these are the teams I'm really keeping my eye on. But you guys tell me in the comments below, who do you think is going to get traded? What do you think is going to be the biggest trade of this deadline? And I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.